Hello, friends. Let's burn some books. Oh, no. No, we're not going to do that. Welcome back to the Sci Fi Bookery. Judging by the overwhelming success of the last video, all 7 people seem to really like it. I thought this time we'd go with something maybe a little more familiar, a little more well-known. This is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This was considered to be Bradbury's like quintessential work. Like if you hear Ray Bradbury, you're probably hearing about Fahrenheit 451. He's written tons and tons of science fiction and non-science fiction too. But that is his quintessential work right there, Fahrenheit 451. Published in 1953 in this format. And there was an earlier work from Galaxy Science Fiction published in 1950 called The Fireman. So I love this. This is, for me, this is required science fiction reading. It lays out everything for a dystopian future, lays out everything that a science fiction story should be. It's assumed things in here, it's different parts of the story are things that Bradbury just talks about, and you need to assume these things. And I think that makes really good science fiction because it implants a vision in your head without actually giving you that vision. It leaves the imagination to do it on its own. And Bradbury is so good at that, just generally, but especially in this work. And there's a reason why this is probably his most popular book, if not the most critically acclaimed. So the book follows, or the story itself follows a guy named Guy Montag, or Montag. I was pronouncing it differently, throughout reading the book. This was my, I think, second or third read through recently, and still one of my absolute favorite works of sci-fi. I'm in the process of catching up on some more Ray Bradbury. So so the story follows Guy Montag, and he's a fireman, but it's not a fireman in the sense that we think of a fireman. We think of firemen as putting out of fires, but in Fahrenheit 451, in this futuristic city sci-fi, there's one place basically in the world, and it's called the city. And firemen actually start fires by burning books. So houses have been made fireproof. Most houses have been made fireproof. The majority of them have been. And so firemen weren't needed anymore. And so they turned their efforts to book burning. And we'll get into reasons for that later on in this. There might be some spoilers in here. Please read this book, though, if you haven't. So anyway, so the story revolves around Montag and his struggle with what he's doing. He doesn't really understand what he's doing, even though he's been doing it for a long time. He's been doing it for 6 years now. He's been a fireman. His wife, Mildred, is sort of this, I really love her character because she's so disconnected from him and from everything else in the world. And she sort of represents this, what Bradbury foresaw as this social media aspect to it. And it's sort of that social media culture where influencers are the new pop culture, and what they say is more important than what anyone else says. And you see a world that's been built around that, which was crazy because this was originally written in short form in 1950, and it very well describes the world now. It describes the world in the 90s. It describes the world in the 60s. Like, it describes a lot of where the world continued to go to. And this is sort of a cautionary tale as to where it's going. So in this story, there's these walls, parlor walls, back in the 50s, they called a living room a parlor. So they're parlor walls, and they're turned into giant TVs. So not only did he foresee that, but flat screen TVs that took up an entire wall. I mean, just the visionary of Bradbury in a lot of his works is just absolutely genius. He's like a Nostradamus in ways. But this societal book is definitely one of those. So these characters come on the TV set, and they're called the family, and they're cousins and aunts and uncles, and they interact with the people on that are watching the TV. And that's very much like what we're doing right now, isn't it? And they can interact with them live, which is really cool. But he doesn't say it, but you can tell by the interactions that it's sort of it's a canned response kind of thing. So you're part of the show, but they're not really saying it. Like, he describes at one point that they're moving their lips in order to say names, but their lips are muffled, I believe is the word he uses, so that it looks like they're saying a name, but it could be any name could fit in there. So it's sort of like they just, dovetail in your name into the storyline, and and now you're part of what you're watching on TV. So these shows, they flip back and forth, and it's really like, it's the precursor to like TikTok or like YouTube shorts, where it's these really quick cuts of things like that. And something that's very popular is violence. So they have these shows that are just random shots of violence, and it's a very desensitized society. So Montag, from the beginning, isn't totally on board with that whole thing. He knows that none of that is right, and he shouldn't be involved in all that. So he does his firefighting. So what it is he goes around and burns books. Books have been outlawed, and anyone who has a book is considered an enemy of the state, and they are arrested. All their books are burned. At times, they are burned with their books. So the firemen are committing murder along with destroying property, which is that's what firemen are against. It's life and property is the fireman oath, is preserving life and property. So they're destroying life and property as futuristic firemen. So Montag is kind of not really on board with that. But we find out that he is reading books, that he is storing books, harboring books. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot of the story, but more talk about the themes. But he hooks up with this guy, and they kind of take it all back. It's a revolt against the man kind of story, where Montag has this awakening, and he takes back what was taken from him. And it means a lot of loss for him, but it also means a lot of growth for him by the end of the book. It's dystopian but uplifting. But now the main theme of all this is the society that's in this book is not a dystopian society as you would normally see it. Normal dystopian society, or normal like a dystopian future story, is the government has destroyed things, or some large entity has destroyed everything, and they're now taking over, and people's lives are ruined, and they're oppressed and stuff like that. But so the typical high school English teacher will tell you that this is a book about censorship, about the government banning books and its censorship, but it's not at all, which is why I wanted to do this review, because I was told in high school that this was a book about censorship. And as in my high school, they were censoring books. I mean, it was like Catcher in the Rye was taken off the shelves in the library, and there's big outcry for things to be returned to the way they were. But this book is not about censorship. This book is about a society that chooses to do away with books. They decide that they don't want books anymore. It's sort of like this dwindling intelligence kind of thing that comes along with social media. So figure that the screens, the TVs in these houses is the social media aspect of it, where they are really cut off from each other. They have very little like social interaction with other people outside of these TVs. They will have people over to watch the TVs with them, but it's very limited social interaction. And there's very little intelligent type of things that come over the TVs, like something you would get from a book where it's very free thinking. So people chose this over books. So the government saw that, they outlawed books. The firemen, having nothing to do now that buildings are all fireproof, they decided that they would then, follow along with what was happening and start raiding houses and burning books. So it isn't a censorship story as much as it is a story of a society giving up on being smart, being intelligent, having imagination. It's akin to this movie Idiocracy that stars Owen Wilson or Luke Wilson. I always get the two confused. It's one of them. It's if you haven't seen it, it's about this dystopian future where everyone is really stupid, and it's from digesting pop culture constantly for generations. And this is that right there in a nutshell. Fahrenheit 451 is about that kind of a future, where if we don't continue to read, if we don't continue to imagine, if we don't continue to create, we're going to end up in that kind of world. And we're getting there already. So we need to go back and start it over and start reading again and start becoming human again. And that's something that I think is really lost in society now, is we are so hooked on social media, we're hooked on influencers, we're looking for approval in every way from strangers. Dig it back, man. I would imagine anyone watching this is probably a reader, and you might not have that problem, but generally in society, we as readers need to reach out and get the world back. We need to take that back, and even in our own small ways, encourage people to read books, encourage your kids especially to read to them, help them to read. That is huge. So that's kind of the social commentary of this book, which I think is overlooked by most high school teachers, and then in turn students grow up thinking that this is a book about censorship, and we're not in that place right now. The government isn't banning books yet, but people are just leaving them behind, and we're not doing anything about it. So that's the underlying social commentary of this book, and that's what is so genius about Ray Bradbury, and why Fahrenheit 451 is one of my favorite sci-fi books, and probably top 3 favorite books of all time, I would say, just general books, is Fahrenheit 451. Absolutely love it. So in the back of this is the 50th anniversary edition. There's another edition that also has a story in the back called Coda. And it's not a story, it's Ray Bradbury complaining about all of the letters that he would get, like fan mail that he would get from school districts and from parents and things like that, asking him to change parts of his story. And I loved that story in the back of this book as much. That kind of letter, it's like an open letter to his haters. So Ray Bradbury not only predicted social media, but predicted social media haters, and wrote directly to them in a little letter. And it's genius. If you ever get to read it, it's called Coda, C-O-D-A. Look it up. You could probably find it online somewhere, of course, or get the book and read it in the back. But it's absolutely genius. His flowery wording in it is hilarious. The way that he insults people is so funny. And he basically calls people out, and he's like, hey, you want to change something in my story? You can't. That's my story. Write your own. And that's sort of his general idea throughout Coda. So that's really fun to see too. So I hope that this helped you to understand Fahrenheit 451 a little better. If not, get really excited about reading it at some point. And even if you have read it already, maybe it did give you a little more insight on the meaning behind it. So that's Fahrenheit 451. This is the Sci Fi Bookery, and we'll see you in the next episode.